On Barro Colorado Island, there exists a shocking ecological reality. For an entire century, the primate population here completely lost its natural survival instincts. Thousands of individuals slept openly on exposed tree branches without hiding and without showing any defensive reactions at all. From the outside, this looked like paradise. But in reality, this peacefulness was actually the sign of a severely collapsing ecosystem. Without pressure from predators, the primate population exploded in number and exhausted the island's natural resources. To save the island, scientists made a controversial decision. They released 2 Harpy Eagles, the assassins of the sky, onto the island. But what happened afterward was far more than ordinary hunting. The 2 eagles began carrying out a special hunting strategy that nobody expected. They were not hunting merely to feed themselves, but seemingly reprogramming the primate's sense of fear and vigilance in the most terrifying ways imaginable. What really happened when survival pressure returned? And why was this brutality the only key to restoring balance across the entire island? Everything began more than 100 years ago when humanity carried out one of the greatest construction projects in history, the Panama Canal. The damming of the river to create Gatun Lake accidentally transformed the peak of Barro Colorado into an isolated island covering 1,500 hectares. For an entire century, the absence of predators such as jaguars and harpy eagles created a defective ecosystem. Ecological data showed that an area of 1,500 hectares was far too small to sustain the roaming territory required by large carnivores. Once the natural controllers completely disappeared, the defense systems of weaker species also gradually deteriorated. The island's primates no longer needed to watch the skies or hide beneath dense forest canopies. The removal of survival pressure caused the primate population, including capuchin monkeys, spider monkeys, and howler monkeys, to explode exponentially. The density of primates here became 20 times higher than in any rainforest region on the mainland. This population explosion quickly transformed the island into a closed ecological environment, where resources were being consumed at a terrifying speed. Every layer of the island's forest canopy became overcrowded with thousands of individuals consuming energy non-stop. The result was a full-scale ecological crisis known as top-down depletion. The primates did not merely consume food based on basic needs. They exploited every visible resource to the maximum extent possible. They devoured young sprouts the moment they emerged from the soil, unintentionally destroying the forest's ability to regenerate. Once the young plants disappeared, the soil structure itself began to deteriorate. Even worse, they destroyed the eggs of smaller bird species, pushing entire supporting ecosystems toward the brink of localized extinction. An island that once possessed rich biodiversity was now left with only the dominance of primates and the steady exhaustion of resources day after day. Recognizing the irreversible collapse of the food pyramid, scientists faced only one possible choice: bring the apex predators back in order to restore survival boundaries and re-establish the laws of nature. This became an emergency intervention campaign to save an ecosystem that was rapidly falling into total decline. To completely solve the problem, ecological experts decided to use the supreme rulers of the South American skies, the Harpy Eagle. However, they made a risky decision. They selected Espironza and Guardia, 2 eagles that had been born and raised entirely in captivity. Why choose captive-bred individuals? Scientists wanted to conduct a real-world experiment. Could nature's hunting instinct truly disappear behind steel mesh walls, or was it simply waiting for the right moment to awaken? Bringing Espironza and Guardia to Barro Colorado was not only a mission to control the primate population, but also a field adaptation process for the 2 eagles themselves. From creatures accustomed to receiving prepared food, they now had to confront the laws of survival deep within the tropical rainforest. Before being released, Espironza and Guardia were equipped with advanced radio tracking devices used to monitor flight data and target control coordinates. In June of 1999, the cage doors opened. The skies above Barro Colorado were unimaginably vast compared to the confined spaces where they had once lived. During the first few days, radar data showed that they struggled with navigation. To survive in the natural world, instinct alone was not enough. They had to completely reprogram the mechanical systems of their bodies. From wings accustomed only to short-distance movement, Espironza and Guardia had to learn how to ride thermal air currents rising from the ground in order to maintain altitude without exhausting their stored energy reserves. The transition from passively receiving food to actively hunting for prey became an enormous physiological challenge. It took time for them to adapt to the complex three-dimensional structure of the tropical forest canopy, learn how to calculate distance accurately, and understand the resistance of the wind. But their confusion did not last long. The moment their eyes scanned across the dense forest canopy and locked onto the careless primate troops below, the genetic code forged by millions of years of apex predation instantly awakened. Their reflexive nervous systems activated at maximum capacity, completely replacing their former habits. Wild instinct transformed the two captive-born individuals into some of the most effective ecological regulators imaginable. The truth about nature has always been brutal. What made this operation so shocking was not the decline in the primate population itself, but the exact way Espironza and Guardia carried out their hunting instincts. While observing through high-powered telescopes, researchers were stunned by a phenomenon that went far beyond every predicted scenario. Instead of subduing and consuming prey directly within the canopy, according to normal predatory behavior, the two eagles carried out a highly unusual action. When a troop of howler monkeys moved across the highest layer of the canopy, Espironza descended from a blind spot. At the exact moment of contact, it unleashed its ultimate weapon talons, measuring up to 18 centimeters in length. The instant those talons locked onto the target, an enormous mechanical crushing force of up to 500 psi was activated. With a force of 500 psi, the entire skeletal structure and central nervous system of the target were completely disabled within a fraction of a second. The prey lost all ability to resist immediately. But the true brutality only began after that first strike. Instead of consuming the target immediately, Espironza gripped the prey tightly, beating its wingspan of more than 2 meters and dragging the victim high into the air dozens of meters above the forest floor. Then, at an altitude far beyond any safe threshold, the eagle suddenly spread open its talons. It released the disabled animal into freefall toward the jungle below. The falling bodies crashed violently through layers of leaves before slamming into the forest floor. Most shocking of all, Espironza and Guardia never descended to retrieve the targets. They abandoned the fallen individuals where they lay and continued beating their wings in search of the next target. Scientists came to realize a startling truth. Because they were captive-born individuals newly released into the wild, their ability to calculate hunting dynamics still needed to be refined. The two eagles were using the dense primate population as live training targets. They captured and dropped prey not out of biological hunger, but to train their aerial attack skills, refine the accuracy of their talons while locking onto moving targets, and optimize their combat reflexes within three-dimensional space. This became the most direct intervention imaginable from the skies for creatures that had forgotten how to survive. After only a few weeks under the relentless and unforgiving hunting pressure of Espironza and Guardia, the entire cognitive system of the island's primates had been completely reset. A century of carefree living officially came to an end, replaced by a condition ecologists refer to as extreme vigilance. The clearest change was the silence. Forests that were once filled with territorial howls now sank into absolute stillness. The primates had learned a brutal lesson. In an ecosystem ruled by assassins of the sky, sound itself becomes a navigational coordinate for predators. Silence was no longer a habit. It had become their only active defensive weapon. The behavior and social structure of the entire primate population were completely overturned. They no longer dared to move across the highest layers of the canopy areas directly exposed to the eagle's line of sight. Instead, the primates retreated deep beneath dense layers of foliage and established entirely new movement patterns. They prioritized areas woven with thick networks of vines, using these mechanical obstacles to limit the maneuverability of predators, with wingspans exceeding 2 meters. The troops' warning system also evolved into a far more complex level. Recorded data showed that the primates developed distinct signals specifically to warn of Harpy Eagle sighting. Every gaze now turned upward toward the sky, according to a strict surveillance cycle. The moment even a faint shadow passed across the canopy, the entire troop immediately froze in complete stillness, eliminating all movement in order to blend into the surrounding environment. This constant pressure weighed heavily upon their nervous systems, triggering a physiological reaction. Cortisol hormone levels within the primate population rose dramatically, redirecting the body's stored energy away from reproduction and toward a permanent state of acute vigilance. As a result, the primate birth rate on the island dropped sharply, naturally preventing another population explosion. Fear had completed its invisible mission, tightening the harsh boundaries of ecological balance and forcing the primates to relearn the most brutal rules of survival. As fear forced the primates into hiding, a large-scale transformation began emerging across the forest floor. The shrinking movement range of the primates released the pressure that had been suppressing vegetation. This recovery process became known as a trophic cascade. Within a short period of time, life began rising once again. Young sprouts finally had the chance to grow, spreading wide leaves to absorb sunlight through photosynthesis. The sunlight filtering through the canopy layers was now fully absorbed by lower-level vegetation, instead of being destroyed through uncontrolled consumption. The density of shrubs recovered rapidly. Other small animal species also benefited from the new order. Birds began returning because their eggs were no longer being destroyed. Across the island, biodiversity gradually recovered, and the food pyramid regained balance through the authority of apex predators. But the true climax of the entire operation unfolded high within the upper canopy of Barro Colorado. Espironza and Guardia had now fully mastered the wild. They began performing advanced biological behaviors together, carrying massive branches and carefully weaving them into an enormous and durable nest. To prepare for the next generation, they transported wooden materials weighing several kilograms and constructed a nest structure measuring up to 2 meters in diameter, strong enough to withstand the brutal conditions of the tropical climate. And then, the greatest miracle of all arrived. A young eagle hatchling broke through its shell and cried out for the first time in the middle of the island. The birth of this new life became undeniable proof that the ecosystem had fully recovered, possessing enough energy to sustain the next generation of apex predators. From inexperienced hunters, Espironza and Guardia had become true rulers, restoring the natural order of Barro Colorado. The intervention records from Barro Colorado Island stand as a reflection of humanity's arrogance in its attempt to control nature. For an entire century, humans unintentionally created an artificial ecosystem where natural conflict was erased in favor of artificial safety. But that very safety ultimately led to the island's decline. The fear brought by Espironza and Guardia through crushing forces reaching 500 PS was never an act of cruelty. In reality, it was the foundational operating system that keeps life sustainable. The brutal hunting process itself became the mechanism required to reactivate an evolutionary cycle that had long been frozen. It proved one fundamental truth: ecological balance has never existed within stillness, but has always been maintained through the violent struggle between predator and prey. The sacrifice of primate individuals in exchange for the rebirth of an entire tropical forest system continues to raise ethical debates. However, the greatest legacy of all was humanity's awakening. Nature does not need protection or artificial safety limits designed by humans. Nature only requires absolute respect for its own harsh and unchanging laws. When the second-generation eagle was born atop the highest canopy, that was the moment the law of survival became sealed once again, restoring Barro Colorado's true identity. An ecosystem is only truly alive when death remains ever present as part of the natural order. Thank you for joining us in uncovering this intervention case study. If you found these scientific perspectives valuable, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Leave your opinion below. Do you support this form of biological intervention, or do you believe humans should never interfere with the fate of other species? We will see you again in the next case study.